I learned what to do as far as management practices and KPIs and numbers to track, but I also learned what not to do when it comes to culture and keeping people happy and all of that stuff. But yeah, eventually started my own thing in 2020, and it didn't ever feel like a risk at that point because I had had so much experience in the industry and so much experience managing multi-million-dollar plumbing departments and everything else.
Awesome. All right. Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Habitual Growth Podcast. The gentleman that you're seeing on the screen, Mitch Smedley, is a friend of mine, but Mitch and I have an interesting story because when I went out to actually build my community, I went out and joined specific entrepreneurship networks. And Mitch was one of the people at the forefront that really caught my attention because of the work that he was doing. We come from similar parts of the country in the Midwest. Mitch has been very successful in growing his own business, but more importantly, growing a team. And so today, what we're really going to talk about is building a culture that lasts, and one that starts with up-leveling yourself, holding yourself to really high standards. And then at the same time, really, what do you do to get that to have a ripple effect across your community, across your family members, and more specifically across your team members as you're growing your company? So with that, Mitch, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, where you're at?
Yeah. So I'm Mitch Smedley, and based out of the Kansas City area, live just a little bit east of Kansas City. So go Chiefs, right? You got the little Chiefs artwork back there. But been a plumber all my life since I was 19. Ironically, my first day as a plumber was September 11th, 2001. Everybody remembers where they were that day, and I surely do too. So I've been a plumber ever since 9/11, and in 2020, I started my own business. And I was kind of late to the party on starting my own business, but that was intentional. I selectively chose positions at different companies through my career to further my boots on the ground education to better prepare myself to start the business. And so we opened up shop in August of 2020. And we took a hold of the marketplace pretty quickly. By our first year in business, we were already a company of 4 employees. And ironically, we just sold a month ago. Didn't completely sell the whole company. It was more of like an equity transfer, brought in some other investors to help grow the business a little bit farther. But it's a lot of that personal development that we were able to pass on to the team that even allowed the sale to take place, even garnered the attention of people that would want to buy the company like that. So
I love that. Well, we're going to dive into all those things. I actually wasn't planning on starting here, but since you brought up kind of your background into how you got into plumbing, what was it from 01 to 2020 that you started actually realizing like, hey, I can start a business? And then what was it that actually drove you to start your own business?
Yeah. So ironically, I spent a lot of those 19 years afraid to start my business. There's a weird phenomenon that happens in the blue collar industry where the smaller blue collar businesses, a lot of times you're dealing fairly closely with the owner of the business. Maybe they still work actively in the business or whatever, but those owners do a fairly good job of scaring you into not starting your own business. They'll say things like, oh, you never want to do this. Oh, I've almost gone bankrupt so many times. I've almost lost everything. This is so stressful and all of that. And you believe it for a while, especially when you're naive and young in the industry. But after a while, you start to realize like, hey, wait a minute. He seems to be doing pretty well for himself. He's got the lake house. He's got the nice car. He travels. Like he's got the finer things in life. So it can't be too bad. And then you start putting together, wait a minute, like anything worth having is going to require sacrifice and risk and everything else. And it's not really risk if it's a calculated risk. And so that was like through like years 1 through 6. And in about year 6, I was like, I'm pretty sure I want to end up starting my own business. And so that's when I started selectively picking jobs at different companies, at different manager roles and different things like that to further my career. I spent 10 years at one company and started their plumbing division from the ground up. And when we started, we had me as the only employee in the plumbing division. And then after those 10 years, we had like 13 people in the plumbing department. And then I left that company and went to another company that was bought out by private equity just before I went there. And that's why I went there, was like, let's see what a company behaves like that garnered the attention of private equity. and let's
Mhm.
see what that whole transition thing looks like. And so I was at that company for 18 months. It was the worst 18 months of my career, but I don't regret it. It was the worst, right?
Yeah.
I learned what to do and what not to do at that company for sure. I learned what to do as far as management practices and KPIs and numbers to track, but I
Yeah.
also learned what not to do when it comes to culture and keeping people happy and all of that stuff. But yeah, eventually started my own thing in 2020, and it didn't ever feel like a risk at that point because I had had so much experience in the industry and so much experience managing multi-million dollar plumbing departments and everything else,
Yeah.
and it all worked, and I was pretty successful in all those roles. And so this time it was just like, hey, I'm going to do it the same way I've always done it, but now it's just my name on the side of the truck instead of somebody else's.
Yeah, felt natural. I love that, and I love that additional context because I grew up in rural Minnesota. The town I grew up in is very small. I was born in a town of about 5,000, moved to a town that was about 10,000, and blue collar was really where it was at. I got into construction very on. I was part of a framing company. I owned a roofing company with a couple of friends of mine. We started a landscaping company, but we didn't have any of that big PE firms coming in doing all these things. Right? There were the guys like you said that had the companies. They had a couple of guys. They did very well for themselves, but I never had that exposure. And I think that's where that naivety comes in sometimes, where you're like, I don't know what I don't know. So, like, of course, anybody can do this. But I really like that you said you took the time to get into it. But you mentioned something specifically when you really started in. You said from 2020 is when August of 2020 is when you started the business. And then you said you really pretty quickly within the first year kind of took over the market.
Yeah.
One, I'm assuming you're attributing a lot of that to your knowledge, your 19 years spent really understanding what not to do and obviously what to do as well. But are there a couple of things that really you attribute to that success, that because that's a pretty quick market takeover, if you will?
Yeah. Yeah. We obviously, there's always outside factors with every market that you're going to try to start a business in. But I think what I would attribute a lot of the success to was understanding people at a fairly high level and understanding what it takes to drive people to like you. And so what I mean by that is, like, we were able to portray the company in a way to where people wanted to shop with us. And we were able to portray the company in a way where people wanted to come work for us. And that's not to say that we've never been slow and couldn't ever do with more customers. We could always deal with more customers. And that's not to say we've never had a hard time finding employees, because we have. But it's quite alarming in the trade space, especially, how you get these people that say they want to grow a business, but they kind of talk out both sides of their mouth, because they also talk about how they don't like people. And it's like, well, you're never going to grow a business if you don't like people. Like, let's get ahead of that first. And that doesn't mean you have to, like, love the individual person, but you do have to learn how to appeal to people in the masses.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's very well said, and oftentimes I'm better at it now. I want to say that I used to fall prey to that all the time. I'm an introvert. I don't like people. And that's actually not true, right? You can be an introvert and still be very good with people. And just to be clear, you're talking both from a marketing perspective, attracting customers, but you're also saying for core team members that you're going to bring into your culture, you have to attract the right people for that. And of course, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I want to touch on it because it's right there on your shirt. You've got this really interesting tagline. You can't talk about Smedley Plumbing without saying fix pipes, pet dogs. Where did that come from? Was that part of your marketing appeal?
So it came about a year and a half into business, actually. There was some shirt I saw somewhere that looked kind of like homemade, maybe a housewife made it on their Cricut machine or something. And it was like for weightlifting, and it said lift heavy and pet dogs. And I'm like, because we already had the dog on the logo. We already kind of branded our company around dogs. I had made all of these. I found a photographer online that would throw food in the air and then snap a picture of the dog eating the food, like, in midair. And so the dog has all these funny looking faces, and their jowls are going everywhere and all this stuff. And so I found the cute versions of those photos, and then I turned them into memes, and I advertised at our plumbing company with them. And so we had already branded the whole company around dogs, and I'm like, we need a slogan. And so I checked the trademark office, and Fixed Pipe Pet Dogs was available. And so we we trademarked the slogan "Fix pipes, pet dogs," and we own it now. So it's kind
That's
of cool.
to me. I mean, to me as an outsider, I think it's a great public appeal. As an entrepreneur myself, owner of a couple of different businesses, I really, I like to look at logos. I like to look at people's slogans. I'm always curious where they come from. Sometimes they're not spot on. They don't really
Right.
resonate with me, but I look at something like you have, like the dog behind you with the adorable road sign, right? The slogan is cute. To me, that's the attractiveness. That's the appeal of some of the marketing. So I just wanted to touch on that because, again, we're talking about culture. How do you really attract the right people in? That really comes with that first relationship, that first interaction with you. But one of the things I really appreciate what you do, it's because I know you're the driver of this, but I'm sure there's a lot of people involved behind the scenes, is your ability to kind of share a greater story online. It's actually why I like following you. I like, some of the stuff that you're building and why we wanted to talk today, because one of the things specifically that you do is you set up these like Saturday morning breakfasts, right? You pull out your grill and you have eggs and bacon and make sandwiches for the guys. You highlight, employee accomplishments. You spotlight your team, some of the work that they're doing. Can you walk us through maybe 2020 to where things are today in terms of your company culture, where it started, where it got to today, and what are some of these rituals that you've been doing over the last 5 years that led you to the point where you successfully were able to leverage that for equity and some cash flow?
Yeah. So we like having a home service business is a little bit difficult to build a team because everybody works individually, right? They're all in their own truck out on their own, but then we try to get everybody to work together as a team and push the team effort. And so we have a weekly meeting every Wednesday. And before we had a shop, we were working out of my garage and then our first two employees' garages. And basically it was like, I'm going to bring you on. I don't have a shop yet, but if we could get just a corner of the garage for you to put some extra stuff in between that and what's on your truck, you'll be good. And so since we didn't have a shop, I have a friend that owns a restaurant in town. And so we met at her restaurant every Wednesday and we would host our team meeting at the restaurant. And I would buy everybody breakfast. And that was a great way to start, but as often in business, what gets you here won't get you there. And so we realized that there's some handicaps with that and there's some constraints with that. For one, the expense of taking everybody out is pretty costly every week. But for two, the distractions that come with trying to hold a meeting in the middle of a restaurant can be kind of hard too, right? You're in the middle of like driving the point home and then here comes the server with somebody's extra bacon or whatever. And so once we got a shop, we very quickly moved all the breakfasts to the shop. I bought a grill and I just cook for everybody every time. And I'm going to say 99% of the time I cook for them. This morning, it was actually, we wanted to have a longer meeting and I wanted to spend less time cooking. So this morning's breakfast was actually McDonald's breakfast burritos. But most of the time, I'm either cooking for them on the Blackstone or I'll cook like a breakfast casserole the night before and feed them. And it's my way to serve the team. Like here they are serving the company all week long. The least I can do is fix them a meal, right in front of them. And then we eat it. And then we usually have our meeting. But a lot of the culture and a lot of the stuff that we talk about in those meetings all has to do with our core values. And it's amazing how small your employee handbook has to be when you run core values as the main driver of the business. Like, I don't need a handbook that talks about like what happens if you steal from the company, because that breaks one of our core values. And so it doesn't matter if it's in the handbook or not, it breaks the core value. I don't need a handbook that talks about like, what happens if you damage, like if you're negligence and you're tearing up company property, right? If you're, damaging the truck or whatever, like that's all part of the core values. And so we can do a lot of HR stuff just through our 5 core values that we have.
And do you bring that up in your weekly meetings? Because I know a lot of companies say they have them, right? And think that they live by them, but you go in and you ask any of the employees and the employees have no idea where they can find them. They don't know what they are. They just kind of spout something off that may be irrelevant or irrelevant. So do you actually lead with that in meetings? Is that something you drive home every single week?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is right or not, but I know a lot of companies will get core values and they make fancy posters of them and they put them up in the shop or in the office. And that's just kind of as far as it goes, right? I've chosen not to make fancy posters of them, and they're on our whiteboard that I lead every team meeting with. And the reason they're written on the whiteboard like that in dry erase marker And the reason for that is because I can erase them and then I have to put them back. Like, we will not do a meeting without those core values in the corner. But if I need the whole whiteboard for something, I got to go, like, they got to go away and I got to put them back. But it also allows me to reference right back to them with every topic of the meeting. And so ironically, as we're transitioning the company around a little bit with this new equity involvement or equity distribution or whatever you want to call it, I'm promoting one of my guys to field manager. And literally his job title is enforce the policies and procedures that we have in place through the core values. And success in this looks like you bringing up the core values often for both highs and lows as you are discussing things with the team as a whole or with teammates individually. And little things like that, I mean, we reference them all the time.
Yeah. That's great. That's really great to hear and very helpful because, as I said, I know a lot of people don't do that. I need to be better about that. It's something where I have them in a cute little PowerPoint that never gets revisited as of now. We're remote workers, so people are all over the globe, but it's something that is always kind of in the back of my mind. How can I take this conversation associated with something that we're doing, a project, or here's a customer issue that we're dealing with? How do we bring that back to our core values to make sure everybody really understands the clarity? You kind of drive it home through the conversations, not making somebody just memorize what's on a.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so, like, as I work with other companies, that's another thing that I do is I work with other companies to help them grow and everything else. But as we work with them, we always suggest, like, don't just come up with values, like, come up with a clarifying statement to help your team understand what that value means in your organization, right? Because, like, a lot of people will have integrity as a core value, but if you're a consulting firm, integrity is going to be different than if you're a home service company. And so a clarifying statement to help drive home what does this core value mean here really helps out.
That's great.
So, like, one of our core values we actually interchange with excellence or experience. And they're fairly interchangeable because we want to give the customer an excellent experience. And so we frivolously interchange those, but that's a different that's a different thing for a home service company than, say, a marketing agency or something like that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. The next question is a little bit of a two-parter because I want to go back to something you had mentioned earlier in the conversation. You had mentioned, before we had a shop, we were going out and asking guys, hey, carve out this, portion of your garage to store whatever, some materials you may need for the job or whatever, because we're working remotely. So quickly, because I don't think we covered this, what is the headcount size of your organization, if you can share? How did you grow from 4 to whatever you are today? And then how much does it matter when you're attracting new talent? Because, as an example, I'm sure not everybody was willing to open up their garage. Maybe they didn't have space. Maybe they, had a different mindset of what their boundaries were between personal and professional relationships. And that potentially could have crossed the line. So did you ever run into some sort of conflict like that as you were bringing on new team members?
Yeah. So at the time we were occupying our guys' garages, we were occupying mine, and then I only had 2 other plumbers at the time. And it was very soon after that, within 6 months after that, where we got a shop. So it wasn't very long at all, and it was just the first 2 that came on board where I was getting a little bit of flexibility with them in that.
Gotcha.
But those were all growing pains too. Like, as we were, the first 3 vans that I bought ended up being too small. They were Ford Transits, and they were too short and like not tall enough and not long enough. And so that's part of why the guys were having to kind of put stuff in their garage. And so once we realized that, then okay, we can just get bigger vans and then we're good. And then the shop actually came around because our opportunity to get bigger vans came when it was like 10 degrees below zero outside. And so I'm not going to sit out in the driveway and try to convert, move these vans over and all the inventory over when it's that cold. And so we were like, all right, we're long overdue. Let's just get a shop and we'll go from there. And now we actually have 2 shops. So we have one that's kind of a cleanish shop, and then we have another one that we do a lot of excavation work out of. And so it's full of dust and dirt and everything else because there's gravel and rubble and concrete and all kinds of stuff in there.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, so you talked a lot about the benefits of things that you've put into place. So the things that have worked. What have you tried from a cultural standpoint that may have backfired, right? And I'm not talking about like meeting in the restaurant and then dealing with some of the growing pains that come along with that. But what have you tried that almost seemed to backfire on your culture that you had to backtrack from and maybe you like steer in a different direction?
Yeah. So hiring bonuses. Now, I haven't tried this at my company, but this is one of the things I was able to learn from working at other places. I have never worked at a place that offers a hiring bonus
Hmm.
or a referral bonus for, like, let's say you work for me, and if you bring a new plumber here, you get a bonus, right?
Hmm.
So the hiring bonus or referral bonus, I've never worked at a place where they had great culture and great tenure when those were in place. And so
Mm.
what we did instead, like, so I learned from the other guys and then we corrected it by we do retention bonuses instead of hiring bonuses. In other words, I'm not going to incentivize you to come here. I'm going to incentivize you to stay here.
Interesting.
And unfortunately, what I've seen a lot in the industry is when you incentivize them to show up and you give them the hiring bonus, the moment that term's over, or a lot of times it's a tapered payout or whatever, all of a sudden the guy dips, right? Or the guy wants to dip and they're pushing the manager for more money. If you give me another bonus, I'll stay or whatever. And that's just not the culture we wanted. And so
Yeah.
we've always done retention bonuses instead of hiring bonuses.
Mm.
Some other things is when we first started the company, I actually didn't have core values in place. And I kind of wanted, like, I had an idea of what I wanted them to be, but I kind of wanted the employees buy in on it and everything else. And we had a cancerous employee come on board
Mm.
and it was destroying everything. And so it's like, all right, we need core values now. And so I worked together with the team. We put core values together. Everybody got buy in on it. Everybody weighed in on it, and then we started enforcing them. And then it's always kind of funny. The cancerous employee realizes, like, hey, wait a minute, this was kind of a trap. Like, I helped write my own, bus ticket out of here. So
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that one too many times. I love the retention bonus, by the way. I think that's very clever. It is something that I don't think a lot of people do, but it's well known, but for whatever reason, it always seems to be the short-term thought process of let's get people in because that's going to be the saving grace. And I like how you kind of flip that. Let's give you that retention. Let's keep you here. Let's make sure that you're a good company fit. You work well with our culture, our team members, our customers, and then we're going to reward you for that performance, right? It almost
yeah,
seems like it's not the carrot versus the stick, but it's definitely long-term thinking in that regard of here's how you reward that performance over time, which then really reinforces that to other employees as well, which I think is really creative.
yeah,
Just on that, so we're talking a little bit about failures here, but there's other things that you do that I really appreciate. One of those things is you are a tremendous family man. And again, the power of social media, the things that we get to see and share in our personal lives, but you do a really good job of this because you've balanced your professional career with the fun and the things that you have gathered along the way. That is having, your sons go out and start their own businesses. You work well with your wife. You guys create these lake days where you go out and invite everybody to dock up and you kind of spend the day lake skating or whatever it is in the lake. Has there ever been an instance where you're creating something in your business that has maybe not aligned with your family core values, if you will, where it clashed with those values or expectations?
yeah. The right off the cuff, the thing that I'm thinking of there is it's kind of that, like, misnomer or that illusion of, like, work life balance, right? And a lot of people think, like, that it's attainable early on, and that's where the misalignment happens. Is like when we started in on the business, I quit my W-2 and we actually took a week's vacation as a family before we opened our doors on the business, because I didn't know, like, I don't know how long it's going to be before I can take another week off with my family, right? And so this might be the last big vacation we have for a couple of years. I want to get the most of it. And so, like, I still even try to turn that into a positive. There's a lot of times I'm working here in this office until 7 or 8 or 9 at night. And when I say a lot of times, at least 3 nights a week where I'm in here that late. But I still try to spin it to show my kids, like, hey, this is what it takes to be successful. Like, if obviously if you need me, I can just walk down there and help. If you're wrenching on a bicycle or something like that and you need my assistance, I can
Mhm.
break away for a few minutes, but I still have work I got to get done. And even on, like, the lake days and everything else, my boys know that, like, if we are able to get out onto the lake on a weekday before 5,
Mhm.
my boys know that they don't get 100% of my time and attention until after 5. And so there may be a time where we have to stop and put the boat at idle and I got to take a phone call because, I'm trying to give the business attention until 5, and then after 5 it's like that can wait, right? But those little, like drawing some boundaries there and communicating those boundaries to your family really, really helps. And they reciprocate too. Like some of my meetings that I do in the evenings, they know the meeting is supposed to be over at 8 o'clock. Well, if it's 8:15 and I'm still carrying on, they'll pop in the doorway and they just give me one of these things and they're like, "Hey, it's my time now," I lost track of time or whatever. And so I'm like, "Hey, I got to go, I've got family to take care of." And I appreciate them holding me accountable for that because I
Yeah.
hold them accountable on making sure I get my time. I don't want to step onto theirs. So
Yeah. Yeah. The
yeah.
proactive communication is a big one. Have you had friction on that though, where it took several conversations to really understand what those expectations are? And where I'm going with this is, you've done a really good job. I love seeing like how you're helping your son start their own business right now. Right. And I know a lot of that comes from watching you, the family man, the company leader, go out and do these things, set these expectations. But how are you, like, what types of conversations do you have with them at this age to really get them to flourish in their own business outside of just saying, this is what it takes and look at me, I'm showing up?
Right. Yeah. So like my older son is doing like the mowing thing right now. And he just turned 16. He's been mowing yards since he was 10, by the way. And he just turned 16. And so we wanted to get a pickup truck. And so now he can take his mower all over the place. Well, he kind of spent too much money on his truck and didn't leave enough money for like maintenance and repairs. And then his truck, go figure, as luck would have it, his truck needed a new transmission. And so like, hey, here's $2,000 that you weren't expecting. And so working with them on that and teaching them how to set some stuff aside for future and all of those things. My younger son is not in the entrepreneurial mindset yet. He's kind of, he thinks he's an entrepreneur on his birthday because he gets money. But, he made a statement just last night. We were talking about how, when our kids play video games, they scream a whole lot and they get really emotional and passionate into them and all this stuff. We
Mhm.
made a comment like, hey, when you guys move out and you guys have like roommates, your roommates are going to get really annoyed with how loud you guys are on these video games. And my younger son was like, well, I'm just not going to have a roommate. And my wife says, you're not going to make it, like you're going to have a roommate. You're not going to make enough money to have a place without a roommate. And I said, hold on, let's pause. The question is, you won't be able to afford to live by yourself. The statement is, or the statement is not, you won't be able to afford to live by yourself. The question rather is, what would I have to do in order to afford to live by myself? Right.
Right. Right.
And trying to get them on that mindset. So I repeat this probably 10 times a week in my family is they're saying like, I can't afford this. And I'm like, stop. It's how can I afford this? Right. And that doesn't make all of a sudden make the money appear, but it changes the process in your mind from like an instant no to at least a fleshed out idea of like, okay, if I wanted to afford this, I would have to do all of this.
Right.
And so then is it worth it?
Yeah. Well, I love how you frame that because that applies to so many different things, but you're also leading them down the path of like staying here is not an option, right?
Right. Right.
You're already getting in front of that where, hey, you son are going to have to make a decision. Here are your options, none of them of which is mom and dad are going to support your rent for here for free. At least not for a long time. That may come up in the future, but I like how you're getting them to proactively think what opportunities, what things do I need to be doing? And I want to pull on that a little bit more because one of the things that I've really found is a lot of people are still afraid to maybe take a little bit of a risk, maybe put themselves on the line and challenge themselves personally. They don't think about it because they don't have the experience yet to get in front of something like that. But, when it comes to both, let's just focus on your sons for now, as well as your employees. What conversations or what are the things that do you do to empower them to maybe take more risks, to push them above their current level of standards, if you will?
Yeah. So it's funny you say this. We just put out a video on our company social media like 3 days ago where my wife went and interviewed some of our employees for their best Mitch impression. And all of their impressions had to do with my little leadership things that I tell them. And some of them were kind of joking in a way, but like, I'll make them go find the answer. Like I try not to give them the answer because if I do that too much, then they just know they have to call me for the answer. And I'm not actually leading and developing anybody. I'm creating a little robot. Right. And I don't want robots. I want people that can find the answers for themselves. And so, encouraging them to use Chat GPT to find things, encouraging them to Google things, and encouraging them to come to the answer without involving somebody else unless they have to, right? And I also encourage them to fail because, like, that's literally how we learn. There's Tell them a story. I won't tell it here. There's a plumbing tool that we use called chain cutters, and they cut big cast iron and clay tile pipes. Well, the first time I tried to use those, I used them way wrong. It took me 1,000 times longer than it should have to cut this pipe, and I was like noodle arms by the end of this. And they let me fail. They watched me use these. I was a real young plumber at the time. And then after I bring this piece over and I'm like, my God, that took forever. Like, I hope we don't have to cut any more of these. And of course, we have to cut hundreds more. And this guy comes over and he teaches me, like, hey, if you just use this other little tool on here, snap, snap, pop, and it's done. And he like cut another one in 3 seconds. And this one took me like 40 minutes. And so, encouraging the guys to fail in that way. And I remind them all, like, unless it involves like hurting somebody or killing somebody, there are very, very few mistakes that you can make that we can't work our way out of. And if you call me and I give you the answer, then you didn't learn anything. You just learned I have the answer. But if you try it this way and it doesn't work, and you try it this way and it doesn't work, and you try it this way and it doesn't work, well, now when you call me, now you're going to know, like, I've tried these things and it didn't work and I'm still stuck. Now we're in a learning position rather than just an information retrieval position.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's hone on that a little more because, as you're talking and giving all these examples, I'm thinking about myself. I'm thinking about other people that are leading teams, right? And to me, sometimes I think this is where leaders, and we're not even talking about CEOs or full entrepreneurs. I mean, you could be an entrepreneur at a big organization leading a team, but I think sometimes it's a weird space as people are learning how to develop into becoming a better leader, right? And so, what was that? Can you talk a little bit about what that transition period was for you? Because sometimes those are really awkward conversations, right? The first time you tell somebody, hey, what do you think? Or, hey, Mitch, what do I do? Why don't you go type it into Google or ask ChatGPT first? Like, what was that transition for you to get to? Because I think a lot of people want to get there, but it can be super uncomfortable to make that transition.
Yeah, for me, it came with affirming to myself that I want to be a leader and not a manager. Managers manage people to produce a numbers result, a metric result. Leaders develop people to be better people. And like, leaders can manage, but managers can't necessarily lead, if that makes sense. And so I had a boss a while ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago, that was a manager, not a leader. And I had an outside mentor at the time reference that person, that individual, and they said, the reason he's that way is he's afraid you're going to get good enough to take his job one day. And what he doesn't know is that if he got you good enough to take his job, then he's more valuable to the company than he is at just a manager, right? And that was such an eye-opening thing. It was like, okay. And then once that was said to me, you see it everywhere. You see people that create rules kind of to hold people down that they manage simply because they don't want one of the people they manage to, like, put their job in jeopardy. And it's like, well, that actually is the goal. If I can teach you to take my job, then that means I can go do bigger and better things.
That's right.
I can teach other people to take jobs, right? And so that mindset shift transfers from work to personal to everything. And some people are better at it than others, right? It's like I'll say the cliche thing about like wives in the household. Wives will run around upset that nobody's cleaning the house, but yet when they clean the house, they don't do it to the wife's standard, and the wife has to go back and clean it anyway. And so it's like there's no way to win there, right? And so like short-term loss, long-term gain. Let's let them clean it wrong. Let's work with them and critique them on how we want it done. We have to know that they're still going to do it wrong 10 or 12 times after that, but they're going to get better. And then eventually, they might take twice as much effort for the first 10 or 12 times, but eventually now they know the standard and they do it the right way, and it's no longer a frustration.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how you led with, I had to make the decision that I wanted to be a leader and not a manager. It's something that I've had to learn myself a couple of years ago. And sometimes that just comes with like, hey, things are going to go wrong and you have to accept that responsibility, right? Like I'm allowing this to happen. That hands off approach, I think, is difficult for a lot of people. But when you make that transition mentally of, hey, this is where I want to be, I want to lead, I don't want to do all these things versus nothing's going to be done my way unless I do this right to my standards, you're always going to hold yourself back. And there's so many examples of people that I have. One in particular is actually a family member of mine who he runs a company of probably 140, 150 individuals. They've got tens of millions of dollars in revenue. And one of the interesting things that he and I were texting about is he was like, I'm one person away from finally being able to do the things that I don't want to do. And I just found that that was really interesting because his mindset is, hey, I'm going to go pay a premium for the right people. I'm going to get those butts in the seats, give them the responsibility, and then I'm going to go off and do something else.
Yeah.
And I knew that in the back of my mind, but it was such a, I don't want to say shocker, but like I read that and I reread it and I was like, that's brilliant. That's exactly like how I should be thinking. And so as you were talking, that's exactly kind of what was going on in the back of my mind, because it's this, nothing's going to be done on my standards, or, hey, I want to do these things over here. It could be a lake day, could be starting a different department for your business, could be working on relationships, whatever it is. But you can't get out of that. You can't free up more time until you become that leader for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, that's another philosophy I adopted early on, was like, hire people that are better at the task than I am. And so like, yes, I can answer our phones, but the people that we have answering our phones are way better at it than I am. And so much so that they took the job. Like they came to me and they were like, you're fired from scheduling. You're not allowed to schedule calls anymore. And I'm like, oh, really? And in the back of my, like, I'm challenging them a little bit, but in the back of my mind, I've been waiting for this moment. Right. And they were like, yeah, we have a system, we have a process. It's your system, but you aren't in the same communication loop that we are. And so when you book a call, it messes everything up. So when a call needs to be booked and they've come through you, you just need to refer them to us and let us do our jobs. And I'm like, yes, that's awesome. And the same goes with like our plumbers. I want our plumbers to be better plumbers than I am. I want our plumbers to be better sales guys than I am, and all of that stuff. And if you can fill your team with the individuals that do the individual tasks better than you, like, I think a lot of people that are making that transition from manager to leader, it's more of a self-confidence issue. They have a low self-confidence and they're worried that somebody might outshine them. Well, that's the goal, is they should outshine you in sales if their job is sales. They should outshine you in customer service if that's their job. Your job is to like lead everybody to success. That's like your one job, is to make sure everybody's doing good, not to be the best. Like, I'm not the best at answering phones and doing all that stuff. My job is just to lead those people to be the best.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. And actually leads to kind of the next question, which we're circling around, because a lot of this is like, you don't just want a yes person. You want them to be a little bit more proactive. You want that resistance. Mitch, you're fired. I get this is your company, but you can't be doing this anymore. We're going to take charge type thing. You've created this environment where you allow that dialogue to take place. You allow risks and failures to happen. So what are some of the ways, because culture thrives through environment, but what are some of the like concrete ways that you've built an environment where your employees feel supported, they feel recognized, they feel seen, and they have the ability to take some of these bigger empowered steps?
So one of the things that we do is every week we do what we call a big job breakdown, where we take one of the larger jobs that we've done in the previous week and we break it down as an entire team in our team meeting. And we recite these rules for the big job breakdown every time. And that is there is no blaming anybody else, but self accountability is always welcome. And if we're going to blame somebody else, we blame the team. So this isn't a time to point fingers, but it is a time to take accountability or responsibility for your own actions, right? And so an example of how this works is like one of the recent jobs we did, we were replacing a sewer line and we had to break open the floor in a customer's bathroom. And this job had gone on for about a day and a half before I made my first visit on the job. And I get to the job and we've got like dirty mud stacked up against white sheetrock painted walls. And there's no plastic on the walls, right? And again, there's no problem that they can make that we can't get ourselves out of. Like, we're going to have to wash the walls when we're done. Worst case scenario, we got to repaint the room. No big deal. But it's like, hey, we didn't put plastic up. I knew the individual that should have put plastic up, but I didn't call him out by name. I said, we failed. We didn't put plastic up. And sure enough, that individual, I didn't even look at him or anything. He goes, that's all me. Typically the guys that cut the concrete, they put plastic up and they didn't. I should have stopped and gone and got some, but I didn't. And so I'm taking accountability for that one. And I'm like, that's great. But now we all know as a team, like, that's one of the differentiating factors between what other companies do and what we do. And little things like that, to where we all learn together. And I encourage the team to fail so much that, like, everyone's open to no one's embarrassed about failure. Everyone's open to talking about it, because we all do so many different things. And it's like, I can learn faster if I learn from your failure as well as mine. Right. And so if I learn from your failure, then I never even have to make your failure to learn from it. And so we speed the process up.
Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts just on that? So I used to work in the petroleum industry, right? And we would do these big turnarounds, and, we'd disassemble these massive pieces of equipment. We'd have to sandblast them, recoat them, do all these things, put everything back together. And it was a major operation that took anywhere from 15 to 45 plus days. So I've been in some of those debrief meetings. You're breaking down projects, you're talking about personal responsibility. What is your personal thoughts around needing an SOP for everything, right? Because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh, they didn't put plastic down. That would have been create an SOP. If you didn't follow the SOP, guess what? But then half the time, I feel like people never even read SOPs. So how do you kind of manage the paperwork side versus the, hey, I truly learned, I'm going to take different action next time, even though I took personal accountability for this?
Yeah. So that's where I always circle back to those core values. And so, in that particular example, we referenced, excellence. That's not the best, that's not the most excellent way to dig up somebody's interior space, by piling dirt against bare walls. And so we do a unique thing in the plumbing company where we only hire guys with 5 years of experience or more, 10,000 hours of experience or more. And I vocalize this to the guys all the time. That keeps me from having to write SOPs for how to do plumbing, because you have 5 years of experience. You already know how to do plumbing. You have 10,000 hours of experience. So all of our SOPs only deal with the customer experience, for how the customer experiences our service, rather than, how to solder a fitting or how to connect a gas line or anything else. Basically, we water it all down to, I'm going to teach you how to do plumbing here and deliver a certain kind of experience here, because, like, three plumbers are going to install a water heater 3 different ways, and they're all to code. And so as long as it's to code, I don't care. I don't care that you came up and went this way and then this way, or came up and went this way and then this way with your water line. Like, is it to code? Cool. Does it leak? No. Are we going to be able to honor the warranty? Like, is it going to live that long? Yes. Awesome. Now let's go back to, like, how did you present the options to the customer? How did your conversation go with the customer? This morning's team meeting that we had this morning, the entire meeting was about all of the hidden things that we do in the company that individually people don't recognize. But then when you pile them all together, the customer's walking away from our visit going, holy cow, like, that was an uncommon experience with a plumber.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have a ton of tiny little details that we do, and those are written processes. We have a written process for how to give a dog treat, because that's a very unique thing in our company. And we have, like, custom logo dog treats.
Yeah.
They'll either have our Smedley Plumbing logo on them, or they'll say Fixed Pipes Pet Dogs. But we have a process to where you are not allowed to give the dog a treat unless it's with the customer's permission, unless it's in view of the customer, and unless it's photographed, because we use those photographs and we share them on social media, right? And in other words, like, don't go give the dog give the dog a treat behind the customer's back, because then the customer doesn't even know you did it. Increase their experience at all, right? And so we want to make sure the customer sees the logo, and we want to hold the logo up with the dog sitting behind it and snap a photo of it. And then either we give it to the dog or the customer gives it to the dog or whatever. We have we handwrite thank you cards to all of our customers after we're in their home. And we just kind of rehash that today. And there's 2 rules for the thank you cards. We need to appreciate them for selecting us to do their service. And then we need to have one unique statement that applies to them and only them. And if that's like, thanks for letting Roscoe watch me while I fixed your plumbing, and we're referring to their pet, then that's what it is, right? Whatever the case may be, it's got to be a unique thing. I'm like in that example, I told them, I could automate supposedly handwritten thank you cards with our CRM. I could automate just mailing those out within 3 days after you were there. So we don't want a handwritten thank you card that just says, thanks for using Smedley Plumbing. Because I could automate that. Like the whole reason of the unique handwritten thing, the thoughtful gift, is to be unique. And so we have to reference a unique thing that happened in their home.
That's cool.
Sorry, I tipped over your potted plant. I'm glad we were able to clean it up. Whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's so good. That's so creative. And I'm bringing back the experience because when you said, we have SOPs for the customer experience, I'm thinking, well, how does that translate? What are you actually writing? Is it how to greet a customer? Do you walk up and shake their hand? But I love the customer experience. Then you rounded it out by saying, and this is how all of these pieces come together, which is, I think, the most important part, because we sometimes get fixated on just this one little piece. Did I give the dog a treat in the right way? What step did I forget? It's not that big of a deal, but it is that big of a deal because the whole thing end to end actually matters tremendously, because they will always think of Smedley Plumbing from that experience moving forward.
Right. Yeah. One other cool thing that we do, and if there's other home service people listening here, this is really neat for anybody. Most businesses will automate, like you'll get a text alert when the technician's heading your way, right? I don't like automating anything when it comes to the client experience. I'll automate back-end stuff all day long, but front-end stuff, anything that directly impacts the client experience, I don't want to automate. And so if they don't text their customers with, like, a lot of companies, you're going to get this like bad Bumble ad. Like it looks like a eHarmony ad or something. It's going to be a picture of a plumber, 4 years ago and 20 pounds ago. And he's clean shaven in the photo, and he doesn't look like that when he shows up. Right. And it's going to say, it's going to like, oh, I like this and I like family and here's my kids' names or whatever. Like, that's not really that personal of a touch anymore these days. And so what we do is our CSRs, they will record the problem for the exact words a customer says. And if the customer says the thingamabob in my toilet's making a squealy noise, that's literally the description of the work that needs to be done, is the thingamabob in the toilet makes a squealy noise. Well, then the other step in the process is our plumbers, when they're headed to a customer's house, the plumber calls the customer. There's a process for this. You have to reference the customer's name. You have to say your name. You have to say what's in your job notes. It sounds like we've got a toilet with a thingamabob making a squealy noise. And that does a couple of things. For one, it makes the customer laugh just like you did. And because the customer knows they were using weird terminology, but it also shows the customer that we've been listening the entire time. So many customers, they get to that first person on the phone, they give them the whole story, the whole spiel, and then what do you have to do? You get passed off onto somebody else, and you got to start all over again and give them the whole backstory, right? And so we cut all that out, and we let them know that we were listening the entire time. And so that way, when the plumber actually gets to the customer's house, the relationship's already started. The only thing missing out of the relationship is knowing what each other looks like.
Yeah.
But they already know what they sound like. They already know they have a sense of humor. Our guys have already promised, we're going to get you taken care of today, and and all of those things. But little things like that make such a difference in the client experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I'm laughing because they're such good ideas, but these are the details that matter. And I think that's probably the biggest nugget you've shared. I've learned a lot from you and heard a lot of amazing things, but that last tidbit is just extremely important, because I think, business owners oftentimes get caught up in that, well, if I do this, it's extra time. If I do this, it's going to be, sending a card to somebody. It's going to cost me a stamp and, $3 a card or whatever it is. If I give them dog treats, here's $5 out of my pocket for everything. But you're showing people you can take the time, you can build the culture, you can pay attention to these details and still make a sustainable, growing business. And that's a really important message, because it's not about cutting corners. It's about the customer experience. And I even think back to, I order beverages from First Form, and it's the first company that's actually written true hand notes on the receipts when they come, right? Hey, Nathan, I see you ordered this, thank you for ordering. And then it's a different pen color. It's a different writing every single time. I was expecting it. I knew it was coming, and it still made me feel great, right? That somebody's in a warehouse signing this thing, folding it and putting it in the package. And I think that's really, really impressive.
Yeah. You want to talk about a First Form related thing, First Form and supplement superstores go hand in hand, right? So I don't do the mail order stuff for First Form. I go to my supplement superstores. I chat with those guys all the time and everything else. those guys listen to our podcast every now and then. And I was on a podcast and we were in the middle of a podcast and I got a hamstring cramp so bad. My chair broke. I almost passed out. Like, I mean, I was hurting. And we don't edit anything out of our podcast when we do it. Like, so if something like that happens, like it happens. My podcast co-host, he accidentally stabbed himself in the neck with a pin and he started like gushing blood everywhere. And he was just, flipping a pin around and accidentally poked himself in the neck. And we just kept going, But the counter guy happened to see that piece of the podcast.
Yeah.
The very next day. So that podcast was released on a Friday. Saturday morning, there's a package on my front door with a handwritten note from Supplement Superstores that says, "Hey, I saw you cramped up on the podcast. Try a packet of these hydration packs. They've got tons of electrolytes in them, and they'll probably reduce your cramping." Totally free. Drove to my house, drop it off, everything. Like, it's that level of uncommon customer service that's going to separate businesses going forward as more AI and everything else takes over. It's the human touch that they really need.
Yeah, and I'm glad you shared that at the end because you're proving this again. One, I think you turned a lot of people onto your podcast. I'm going to have to start watching now. People are getting stabbed in the neck and falling out of chairs. Definitely entertaining. But two, getting people to care is, I think, the hardest thing. And that just comes from casting a bigger vision, creating a culture where people can thrive. They feel wanted, they feel supported, they feel encouraged, they can grow. I know Andy does that a lot with Supplement Superstores and First Farm. It's why I wanted to have you on today, because I see you doing the same things. Let's just kind of round this out then with what comes next for Mitch and Smedley Plumbing. When you're another 10, 20 years down the line, one, where do you want to see you going and Smedley Plumbing going? But then at the same time, and more importantly, what do you want your kids and your wife to think back on? The culture that you've created, the leaders that you become, and the leaders that you've helped them become as well.
So first part is like, what's in the future for Smedley Plumbing? So as I just sold off a large part of the equity of Smedley Plumbing, I'm now a minority percentage owner. I own the smallest percent of the 6 owners of the company now, but those 6 owners are local business owners. They're local entrepreneurs here in the KC metro area, and they saw a business with plenty of opportunity. And now we get 6 heads to make decisions instead of one. And all of these guys are very successful in their own right. They own several businesses that can cross-link off of each other. So the goal is to magnify the business enough to where the remaining portion of my equity actually matches the initial portion that I sold off. So we want to multiply the company that large. But the main reason that I did the equity distribution like that was to free up my time for trade wins. And that's it. I call it a passion project, but it pays the bills. Trade wins is where we take small trades-based business owners and help them get to their first $1 million to $3 million in sales.
Love that.
There's a lot of business coaches out there that are great at getting you from 3 million to 5 or 5 to 10, but there's very few that help you get your business started and help you get to that first $1 million. And so we've built Trade Wins for that. The whole reason I started Trade Wins is because I like having as big of a positive impact on as many people as possible. So this, like, Trade Wins allows me to have an impact on 50 or 60 businesses rather than just my own. In the future, words of affirmation are my love language, right? And my whole family knows this. And they aren't pandering to me when they say this, but it's the coolest thing ever when they'll vocalize, like, "I love how much you care for people," or "I love how much you were considerate there." I had to deal with an upset customer yesterday on the phone, and I never raised my voice. I never did anything. And my wife was like, "Man, I just appreciate, like, that person was mad at you and hated you, and you were able to have a conversation with them where they were thanking you by the end of it," and little things like that. And so watching our kids go through that, which is I've got boys in puberty right now, so they're 14 and 16. That is a firestorm of emotions that is all over the place every day. And so learning to talk with them and get them to think through the problem and come to the resolution, letting them fail. This last weekend, we were living by one of the mottos of Jordan Peterson, where it's "let your kids do dangerous things safely." And we were doing some questionably legal things on the water on the lake this weekend with jumping. We were jumping personal watercrafts off of our wake, but we were way too close to the boat. But the lake was empty and the police weren't out there. So we were like, "Hey, let's just have fun," right? And go figure, my kid's now in a walking boot because he got a little too much air and, ate it. but that's the whole letting our kids do dangerous things safely kind of thing. So, getting, and I do that with our employees too. Like our employees, 6 months ago, they bought a 2000, they came to me and said, we want to do this job, but it takes a $2,000 tool to do it. And I'm like, well, if you guys think you can sell this job after this one, and I'm not just buying the tool for this job, let's do it. And they said, okay. And I said, do we even know how to use this tool? And they were like, oh, we'll figure it out. Well, they broke the $2,000 tool, and the job, like the job didn't even get started and they'd already broke the tool. We were using the tool wrong. And so they're like, oh, Mitch is going to be mad. And I'm like, I show up to the job and I'm like, guys, I love this. And they were like, you love this? And I'm like, yeah. We all, like, the whole company was there because everyone wanted to see this tool in action. I'm like, we all know the way not to use this thing now. Like I can't send you to school for less than that, the money that costs. So, encouraging people to fail and learn from failure, and learning that failure isn't the end, giving up is the end. That's the biggest key with anything.
Awesome. Well, I love this, Mitch. I say this without pandering. Words of affirmation. You're a great leader. You run a tremendous business. You built a culture that I know others aspire to replicate. So thank you for the time today. Just really quickly, how can people find you if they want to interact with you or Smedley Plumbing?
Yeah, so I'm easily most best found on Facebook. And that's where I do most of my stuff. And so that's just Mitch Smedley on Facebook. And I've got the blue check there. You'll see a photo of me standing in front of one of our plumbing trucks with the American flag in the background. So that's one of the easiest ways to find me there. If you want to find our podcast, it's called The Void. And it's on, Apple and Spotify, and we've even got a little bit on YouTube too. But there's a couple of podcasts called The Void. Ours is the white square with red letters. It says The Void, and it's got like a line with a valley over the top of it to signify like you're crossing the void from employee to employer or self-employed. So those are usually the two best ways to find me. There's other ways, but if you find those, you'll find everything else. So
awesome. Well, thank you again, Mitch, for the time today. Really, really enjoy this. And for the audience, thank you for tuning in. Let's get out there and make ourselves a little bit better today. Take some of these golden nuggets that Nick had shared, apply them to your own life and your own business, and we're going to go out there and make an impact. So until next time, we'll see you soon.
All right, we'll see you.